In the busy heart of Nairobi, 18-year-old Amara walked home with shaking hands, clutching her exam results close to her chest. She already knew they weren't perfect, but she hoped her father would understand. Before she could say a word, he snatched the envelope and tore it open. His face changed in an instant, pride turned to anger. Without a single word, he grabbed her by the arm and dragged her outside. The air was still, neighbors peeking through fences as he reached for a pair of scissors. In a blur, he began cutting off her long, beautiful braids, the same ones her late mother used to braid while humming softly. Strands of hair fell to the ground like pieces of her spirit. Amara stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, her heart breaking with every snip. The street was silent except for the sound of her quiet sobs. But beneath those tears, something began to rise, not anger, not hatred, but strength. She looked at the fallen braids scattered around her feet and felt a strange fire inside. Her father thought he had taken away her pride, but he had only lit a spark that would soon grow into something unstoppable. That night, as she stared at her reflection in the mirror, her uneven hair and swollen eyes told a story of pain, but also of power. Amara didn't know it yet, but this moment would change not just her life, but countless others too. That night, Amara locked herself in her small room and sat in front of the mirror. The girl staring back at her didn't look like the Amara she knew. Her scalp was uneven, her once long braids now gone. She touched her head gently and felt the sting of shame, but even stronger was the ache in her heart. Her father's words and anger echoed in her mind. She felt small, broken, and betrayed. For hours, she sat in silence, staring at her reflection as tears rolled down her cheeks. But deep inside, something whispered, "Enough." She wiped her face and took a deep breath. If she couldn't speak in her own home, she would speak to the world. Amara reached for her phone and opened a youth forum she often read but never posted on. Her fingers trembled as she began typing. She wrote about her father's obsession with reputation, about how fear lived in her house, about how love was replaced by pressure. She described every moment, the scissors, the shame, the pain, and how it felt to lose more than just hair that day. Her words were simple but powerful, raw but honest. When she finished, she hesitated for a second, then pressed post. She didn't expect anything to happen. But within hours, her story began to spread. Dozens of strangers replied, sharing their own experiences of strict parents, of being silenced, of trying to live up to impossible expectations. By morning, thousands had read her post. By the next day, it was all over social media. Her name became a symbol, Amara, the brave girl who spoke up. Radio hosts discussed her story. Teachers quoted her words in class. Parents began questioning their ways. In that small room, with her short hair and tired eyes, Amara had started something no one could have imagined. Her pain had found a purpose, and her silence had turned into a voice that echoed far beyond her own walls. Days slowly turned into weeks, but Amara's story refused to fade away. What started as a late-night post from her bedroom had become a wave sweeping across Africa. Everywhere, people were talking about the girl from Nairobi whose father cut her hair to punish her. Her post had been shared thousands of times. Influencers used her words in their videos, activists quoted her in speeches, and educators turned her story into lessons about respect and emotional well-being. News outlets called her brave. Strangers sent her messages filled with love, saying her courage gave them strength to speak up too. Hashtags began to trend, hashtag Amara's voice, hashtag let children breathe, hashtag Amara's law. It wasn't just a story anymore. It had become a movement. In schools, teachers began holding open discussions about mental health and the pressure young people faced at home. Teenagers stood up in classrooms and shared things they had been too afraid to say before. Parents listened, some with tears in their eyes, realizing how much harm silence and fear had caused. The country was changing, one conversation at a time. Amara watched it all from her phone, her face glowing in the screen light. She was still the same girl, sitting in the same small room, but now her voice reached places she had never dreamed of. Yet, in the middle of all this noise and praise, her house stayed quiet. Her father barely looked at her. He went about his days pretending not to hear the news or see the messages. The neighbors whispered about how his daughter had become famous, but he couldn't bring himself to talk about it. Pride chained his words, and guilt weighed heavy in his heart. Deep down, he knew he had lost control, not only of his anger that day but of the image he tried so hard to protect. And while the world lifted Amara up, he sat alone in his silence, unable to admit the truth that everyone else could already see: his daughter was stronger than he had ever allowed her to be. Amara's life began to change in ways she never expected. Invitations started pouring in from NGOs and youth organizations that wanted her to speak at their events. At first, she hesitated. She was shy, unsure if her voice was strong enough for a stage. But every time she remembered that painful night, she found courage. The first time she stood before a crowd, her heart raced, her palms sweaty, but when she began to speak, the room went silent. Her voice was calm but full of power, steady and clear. She didn't shout or cry, she simply told her story: how fear lived in her home, how silence hurt more than words, and how losing her hair became the beginning of finding her strength. People leaned forward in their seats, some wiping tears, others nodding. By the end, the room always erupted in applause. Her words stayed with them long after she stepped down from the stage. One line became the heart of her message: "You can cut my hair, but not my will." Those words spread like fire. They were printed on posters, shared online, and shouted at youth rallies. It became more than a phrase, it became a symbol of standing tall through pain. Soon, Amara's name was everywhere. She was invited to more debates, television interviews, and youth forums. Each time, she spoke not only for herself but for every young person who had ever been silenced by fear. Her confidence grew, but she stayed humble, always remembering the scared girl who once cried in front of a mirror. One afternoon, after a powerful speech at a community event, a journalist approached her. He told her story needed to be seen, not just heard. He wanted to make a short documentary about her journey, from that dark night in her father's yard to the bright stages where she now stood. Amara agreed, knowing that her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every girl who had ever been told to stay quiet, and now, it was time for the world to listen. The day of the documentary premiere arrived like a dream. The hall was packed with students, teachers, activists, and journalists. Cameras flashed, lights shimmered, and the air buzzed with excitement. On the big screen, Amara's story began to play, the same story that had started in her small room months ago. The audience watched in silence as her pain, courage, and rise unfolded. The clips showed the night her father cut her hair, her first post online, and the speeches that inspired a movement. By the end of the film, people were wiping their eyes, their hearts heavy but full of hope. Among the audience, sitting quietly in the corner, was her father. He hadn't planned to come, but curiosity and guilt had finally pushed him there. As he watched his daughter's face on the screen, strong, calm, and brave, his throat tightened. He remembered that night, the anger, the scissors, the silence that followed. Every scene was a painful mirror showing what his pride had destroyed and what his daughter had rebuilt. When the documentary ended, the host stepped up and announced the keynote speaker, Amara. Her father's heart stopped for a second. Then she walked onto the stage, her head held high, her short hair glowing under the lights. The crowd erupted into applause. She spoke with confidence, her voice steady and full of warmth. She talked about pain, forgiveness, and how every scar can grow into strength. As she spoke, her father's eyes filled with tears. For the first time, he didn't see her as his child who had failed him. He saw her as a woman, strong, wise, and full of light. When she finished, the room rose in a standing ovation. Her father clapped too, though his hands trembled. In that moment, pride didn't matter anymore. What mattered was love, the kind he had almost lost but had found again through the strength of the daughter he once broke. After her speech, the crowd was still on its feet, clapping and cheering. Cameras flashed, and people rushed forward to shake Amara's hand. Backstage, she took a deep breath, her heart still racing from the emotion of the moment. She didn't notice her father at first. He stood quietly near the curtain, watching her from a distance. His eyes were wet, his shoulders heavy with regret. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. This was the same daughter he had once scolded for not being perfect, the same girl whose tears he had ignored. But now, she stood before the world, proud, strong, and admired by everyone. Slowly, he walked toward her, his hands trembling. When she turned and saw him, time seemed to pause. The same man who had once been her greatest fear now looked smaller, older, softer. He swallowed hard before speaking, his voice cracking as he said, "I thought I was teaching you discipline. I was wrong." His words hung in the air, filled with guilt and love that had come too late. The room went silent. People nearby stopped what they were doing, watching the moment unfold. Amara looked at him quietly. For a long time, she said nothing. There was no anger in her eyes, only peace. Then, slowly, she smiled, a small but powerful smile. "You cut my hair, father," she said softly, her voice steady. But look, it grew stronger. Her father's eyes widened, tears spilling down his cheeks. The crew members, the journalists, everyone who heard her words felt a lump in their throat. The silence broke into applause, louder and louder, echoing through the hall. Her father stepped forward, and for the first time in years, he embraced his daughter. Cameras captured the moment, not just a father and daughter, but a picture of forgiveness, healing, and change. That single moment became the most shared video of the year, reminding millions that love can rise even from the deepest hurt. Within a year, Amara's life had become something she never imagined. The girl who once hid in her room, crying in silence, was now leading a movement. Inspired by the messages she received from other young girls who had faced humiliation and abuse, she decided to create something bigger, something that would help them rebuild their confidence just like she had. She launched a foundation called The Crown Within, a safe space for girls who had been stripped of their dignity in the name of discipline. Its goal was simple, to remind every girl that her worth could never be cut, beaten, or silenced. Amara worked day and night, traveling to schools and communities, speaking to girls who carried silent pain in their hearts. She taught them to find their voice, to stand tall, and to believe that no one had the right to make them feel small. The same hands that once trembled in fear now signed partnerships with global organizations, big companies, and women's rights groups who wanted to support her cause. Every meeting she entered, people listened. Her presence carried power, not from fame, but from truth. But the most beautiful change was at home. Her father, once her biggest critic, became her strongest ally. He attended her events, often standing quietly in the back, watching with pride. He helped with the foundation's paperwork, handled logistics, and even joined her in community visits. People were surprised to see him there. The same man who had once cut his daughter's hair as punishment now helped her fight for others' dignity. When asked why, he always said the same thing, "I thought I was teaching her discipline. But she's the one who taught me love." Their bond grew stronger with every project, every success. Together, they turned a story of pain into one of purpose. Amara had not only healed herself, she had transformed her father, and through their journey, they were changing lives across the world. One sunny afternoon, Amara stood on a large stage at a youth conference filled with hundreds of students. The air buzzed with excitement as she walked up to the microphone, her short hair glistening under the lights. She looked around at all the young faces staring up at her, faces full of dreams, fear, and hope. Taking a deep breath, she smiled and began to speak. Her voice was soft at first, but it carried strength that filled the room. She told them about the girl she once was, the one who went home with trembling hands and walked through pain she didn't deserve. She told them how she had lost everything that made her feel beautiful, but found something far more powerful, her voice. As she spoke, the audience hung on every word. Her story was no longer just hers, it was theirs too. She paused for a moment, raised her hand, and touched her short hair. The crowd went silent. Then she said clearly, "They thought this was my shame. But this is my crown." Her voice echoed through the hall, steady and proud. In that single moment, everyone felt something shift. Cameras flashed, capturing her with her head held high and her smile glowing like victory. When the clip of her speech was posted online, it spread like wildfire. Within days, it was everywhere, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and news channels across the continent. Millions watched and shared her words. Students quoted her line in their classrooms, and girls across Africa began posting pictures of their short hair with the caption, "This is my crown." That simple moment became a movement once again. Amara had turned what once humiliated her into a symbol of power and pride. Her story reminded the world that no cut, no pain, and no person could ever define her worth. She had taken her deepest wound and turned it into a crown that no one could take away. Amara's story didn't stop in Africa. Within months, it had crossed oceans and reached people in places she had never even dreamed of. News channels in Europe, Asia, and America shared her journey, the girl from Nairobi who turned pain into purpose. Her documentary was translated into different languages, and her speech was played in classrooms across the world. Teachers used her story to teach lessons about respect, mental health, and courage. Students wrote essays about her. Some even acted out her story in school plays, showing how a single act of cruelty could be turned into something powerful and good. In homes far away from Kenya, parents watched Amara's video and sat in silence afterward. Many saw themselves in her father, strict, proud, thinking discipline was love. But now they began to understand that love doesn't have to hurt. Conversations began at dinner tables. Parents hugged their children tighter that night, whispering apologies they had never said before. It was as if Amara's voice had reached right into their hearts and opened a door that had been closed for too long. Soon, global organizations invited her to speak about emotional abuse and youth empowerment. She appeared on international talk shows, where hosts introduced her as the girl who changed the way the world sees discipline. Every time she spoke, she carried her message with humility and warmth, reminding everyone that healing was possible, even after deep wounds. Her movement became more than a campaign, it became a symbol of resilience. People from all walks of life began to use the phrase, "Rise like Amara," whenever they faced challenges. It wasn't about fame anymore, it was about hope. Amara had shown the world that even when life tears you apart, you can still stand, still shine, and still rise. Her story became a mirror for the world, reflecting the truth that strength is not found in perfection, but in the courage to rebuild after you've been broken. Years later, the sound of applause filled the grand hall of a university in Nairobi. The seats were packed with graduates dressed in bright gowns and smiling proudly, their families cheering from the audience. On stage stood Amara, no longer the scared girl she once was, but a confident woman whose name had become known around the world. Life had come full circle. She was now giving the commencement speech at the same university her father had once dreamed she would attend. He sat in the front row, his eyes never leaving her, his heart full of pride and gratitude. Amara looked out at the sea of young faces ready to step into their own journeys. She spoke about fear, failure, and the strength that comes from standing back up after life knocks you down. Her voice was calm but full of emotion as she told them how pain can become purpose and how confidence is something no one can take away unless you give it to them. The room was silent, every word sinking deep into the hearts of those listening. As she reached the end of her speech, she paused for a moment, touched her short hair, now a symbol recognized everywhere, and smiled. "Don't let anyone cut your confidence," she said softly, her voice echoing across the hall. "Even if they cut your hair, remember, it will always grow back stronger." The audience rose to their feet in applause. Some clapped, some cried, all inspired. Her father stood too, his hands shaking, tears in his eyes, watching the woman his daughter had become. In that moment, Amara's story wasn't just hers anymore, it belonged to everyone who had ever been broken, yet chose to grow back stronger.